Greetings and bienvenue everyone, I am your esteemed host Wolfacid64, coming at you with another Elden Ring YouTube video. So the purposes of today's video are to show where all the weapons are in Limgrave, the beginning area of Elden Ring for all new players to grab. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into it by going to grab the broadsword, the short bow, and the club respectively from the first merchant area. So what you're going to want to do is come over to this cliff right here on the map, and then yeah, you'll ride that spirit spring down, but you have to have torrent, otherwise you will just fall into the ground. And so if you follow this pathway right here that I'm showing on the map, you can come over here to this little nomadic merchant and he will give you the weapons. He sells all three: the broadsword, the club, and the short bow. The broadsword needs 10 strength, 10 dexterity to use correctly, and it gets a C scaling in strength and a D scaling in dexterity. The club only requires 10 strength and gets you a B scaling. The short bow needs 8 strength with a D scaling in it, and the dexterity requirement is 10 with also a D scaling. All three of these can be found in the same area and all require 12 of each smithing stone item to make them stronger. The short bow cannot be infused to do like elemental damage like fire, lightning, and such, nor can it be infused to do status effects like frost or poison or whatever you want it. But the club and the broadsword can. So there you go. Up next on the list of weapons is the Erdtree Great Bow, found in the Stranded Graveyard. It is your first legacy dungeon and the reward for completing the entire dungeon. It requires 20 strength with a D scaling, dexterity is 14 with a D scaling, and faith is 14 with a D scaling. It's not the best of the weapons that you can get early on, but it sure doesn't hurt to have a great bow on your side. I mean, look at it. It's a giant fuck you to humanity and all that shit. But yeah, there you go. This is your first somber smithing weapon, which means you need one of each somber smithing stone, all the way up to plus 10, and then it will be fully maxed out, and you don't need to do anything else to it. Also can't be infused. Any bow I come across, you just should assume that you can't use it or infuse it, otherwise it would be too broken, so I get why. Coming up next is the Golden Halberd, which requires 30 strength with a B scaling, 14 dexterity with a D scaling, and then 12 faith with a also D scaling. It is dropped as a reward for killing the Tree Sentinel directly north of the First Step Site of Grace, one of the best strength builds, or the Straith build weapons of all time. Like if you have a strength hybrid build with a little bit of faith and mostly strength, this weapon's pretty good. The Ash of War is also very, very decent. Golden Vow boosts, or at least the Ash of War variant of it, boosts all your following attacks by, I want to say, 10%, and then it also reduces all incoming damage by 10%. As you can clearly see, this big bastard wields it, so don't feel like you have to go after these specific weapons because they are more challenging, especially locked behind your first field boss. Same with the Erdtree bow there, but you know, always be on the lookout for it. You can always, don't ever feel pressure to do everything in Elden Ring first. You can always come back. Up next is the torch that can be bought from Kale in the Church of Ella. It requires 5 strength with a C scaling and 5 dexterity with a D scaling. This is another smithing stone weapon, so you need 12 of each smithing stone to upgrade it. It's not very good for, beating anything in the game. Oddly enough, a torch can't really do much, but it can light your way a lot brighter than most other items can. There's a lantern that you can get later on, but this is a better lighting source for the most part. But the lantern does free up both of your hands instead of taking one, so it's a trade-off. Up next is the undisputed king of straight swords, the Lord Sworn Great Straight Sword. My bad. It can be farmed off of the regular soldiers that use them throughout the lands between. The soldiers can be first met when heading north from the Church of Ella. It's one of the best smithing stone weapons you can get very early on. I don't have any negatives. It requires 10 strength with a D scaling and 10 dexterity with also a D scaling. But it's so infusible and flexible that it's not even, fucking funny. And as you see here, I just got a new one. So, just run through this little area here at least 4 times and you might end up with 1 or 2 of them at the end of it. You don't really need high luck to get these swords. After the Lord Sworn Straight Sword, you get the Lord Sworn Great Sword. I didn't name it, but here we are. So what you're going to do here is come to the gate front side of Grace. You're going to rest here if you need to. You're going to kill that guard, and then wham bam, thank you ma'am, the weapon's right here. It requires 16 strength with a C scaling and 10 dexterity with a D scaling. It can be found in the treasure cart east of the gate front side of Grace, which is where we are right now. Great weapon, and it's baby's first great sword. It's like if From Software took the moveset of the Bastard's sword, but with the range of the Claymore. Not the best combo, but it gets outclassed by the actual Claymore, so there you go. Up next is the Standard Flail, which requires 10 strength with a D scaling and 18 dexterity with a C scaling. It can also be found in the second treasure chest cart west of the Agiel Lake north side of Grace. It's the biggest piece of dog shit I've ever seen. Next! Following that pile of feculent mass, we can come to another one called the Dagger. It requires 5 strength to use correctly with a D scaling, and then 9 dexterity with a B scaling. It can be farmed from pretty much any foot soldier who carries it in the lands between. I mean, it's alright, no negatives, but if you really want it, you can come over to this little area here, kill all these guys, and eventually one of them will drop it for you. After grabbing the dagger, we will return back to the Agiel Lake north side of Grace to farm the Partisan. The Partisan requires a 15 strength to use correctly with a C scaling, and a 12 dexterity and with a D scaling. And it can be farmed from any of the guys using it in the lands between, but the closest one you'll ever find in the beginning area of the game is the one here in the Gatefront Ruins side of Grace. So, just have fun killing all these guys, but do be careful that Godric Knight is very powerful. This guy, with the big spear and the shield. Up next is the short spear that can be farmed in the same area as the Partisan. It requires 10 strength to use correctly with a D scaling and 10 dexterity with a C scaling. It is another smithing weapon, but it's meh. Up next is the War Pick, which requires 11 strength to use correctly with a C scaling and 9 dexterity with also a C scaling. It can be farmed from any soldiers in the land between that use it, and it's mid as fuck. Next! Staying in the same goddamn area is the Soldier's Crossbow that only requires 10 strength and 8 dexterity to use correctly. It can be farmed from foot soldiers and exile soldiers who use it. You should just be able to run through Stormvale a couple of times and be able to get it. If not, you can use the Gatefront Ruins side of Grace here with this little Tunnel of Death if you're so inclined. There's no need for it. Since it doesn't get any scaling, it's just kind of mid as fuck. There are better options, and you will find a better one later on. Next. Up next is the Earthsteel Dagger, which requires 7 strength to use correctly, 12 dexterity, and then 14 faith to use correctly. You can expect a D-scaling in all of them. It is dropped as a reward for completing Kenneth Heights' quest to retake his fort in the south, east of Limgrave. But first we're going to be going through the area real quick just to make sure you all know where it is. So starting from the Agiel Lake side of Grace, or Agiel Lake south side of Grace, we'll be going north towards the Mistwoods. You're going to take a right here, going to jump over here. I take this path every time just to avoid as much trouble as possible. Here's the Mistwood outskirts, and then you're going to run up to here on this little golden archway, unlike McDonald's. And you're going to talk to Kenneth Height, exhaust all his dialogue, and he'll tell you to retake his fort for him because there's a Godric soldier who's taking over it. I use this Third Church of America as kind of a checkpoint, so if in case I die, it's not that far away. It's even easier than going from the Mistwoods outskirts side of Grace. So you're going to follow this pathway as much as humanly possible because there's a very powerful set of enemies in here. And then we're going to get to the fort side of Grace. Once you're here, you're going to run up into the fort, kill all these dumbasses all you want. It's going to be a lot easier said than done for the new players, but you know, that's what this guide is for. Once you have killed everything here, and I do mean kill everything because you never know when someone's going to shove a sword up your ass. Gonna come over here, kill the Godric soldier, or the Godric knight, and then poof back to Kenneth Height. Once you're there, you're gonna talk to him, and he's gonna give you the dagger as a reward. To squeeze any amount of damage out of this, just give it the Flame Art Affinity. After the Earthsteel Dagger, we're going to be grabbing the Dismounter, which requires 19 Strength to use correctly with a C scaling, and then 16 Dexterity with a D scaling. It can be farmed off the Kaiden Sellswords in Limgrave, and I will show you the prime area to do that. It's a good weapon, so don't be discouraged by the stat allocation. It's a very, very good quality weapon. A quality weapon requires Strength and Dexterity to maximize the damage. So without further delay, here we go. After that bout of farming, we're going to do some more by getting the Noble Slender Sword. It requires 8 Strength and 11 Dexterity with an E scaling in Strength and a B scaling in Dexterity. An E scaling is the worst you can get, while B is the third best you can get. It can be farmed from wandering nobles who use it in the lands between. Do not farm. Get a friend to use or use a mod to get it if you really, really want to use it. Noble's S-Stock is next up on the list, and it requires a 9 Strength. It has a 9 Strength requirement with a D scaling, and then 10 Dexterity with also a D scaling. Also farmed from Wandering Nobles, see above. Up next on the agenda, my friend, is the Great Axe, which requires 30 Strength and has a C scaling, and 8 Dex with D scaling. Can be looted from the moving treasure cart pulled by 2 trolls in the southern area of Limgrave. 30 Strength, really from software? Damn! One of the better strength weapons, though. Following one of the better strength weapons is one of the worst legendary armaments, the Devourer's Scepter. It requires 24 Strength to use correctly with a C scaling, 20 Dex with a C scaling, and then 25 Faith with a C scaling. I mean, it's a good fiery bonk stick, but that's like the best I can give it. The unique skill sucks more than even the best Hoovers. And if you really, really want it, you can go to the War Master's Shack and kill Bernal very early on. Again, it's going to be a difficult fight, but he will drop it immediately. I wouldn't recommend it, though. There are literally any other better weapons here. Like, this thing is so hot garbage, I made a fucking review about it. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next little section here. Peace. After wiping the Devourer's Scepter off our boots, we're gonna go get the Lance in the same area. It requires 20 Strength with a C scaling and 14 Dexterity with a C scaling as well. It can be found as ground loot within a soldier's camp just between the War Master's Shack and the Death-Touched Catacombs. Love it. No notes at all. Once again, to continue staying in this area, we have the Knight's Greatsword, which requires 16 Strength with a D scaling and a 12 in Dexterity, also a D scaling. Both of these are to start off with. There's better scaling later on when you upgrade the weapons. It can be found by the god or the knights who wield it, or just basic enemies in the game, pretty much all over. They have a chance to drop it. It is one of the best PvP weapons you could ever grab, or one of the best weapons ever. So yeah, be sure to grab it whenever you can. After making our way over to the Death-Touched Catacombs is the Scimitar, which requires 7 Strength with a D scaling and 13 Dexterity with a C scaling. Can be farmed from the skeletons who use it all over the game, but the Death-Touched Catacombs are the main area you're going to find it in Limgrave. It can also be bought from the Husk of the Twin Maidens in the Round Table Hold, or you can get it with the Warrior class as the beginning. You definitely have better options, I'm not going to lie. After the Scimitar, we will be here to grab the Ujigatana, which requires 11 Strength to use correctly and starts with a D scaling, as well as it needs 15 Dexterity to use correctly with a C scaling to start off with. It can be found as ground loot in the Death-Touched Catacombs, and it is also the starting weapon of the Samurai class. It is a very good beginner weapon and even mid-level weapon for all players too. You can take it pretty much into the middle of the game before you need to swap it out to something else. Once again, we are staying in the area to grab the longbow. It requires 9 strength to use with a starting D scaling, and then it also requires 14 dexterity to use with another D scaling to start off with. Can be farmed from skeletons in the Death-Touched Catacombs, but it is also the beginning weapon of the Samurai starting class, and or can be bought from the Husk of the Twin Maidens in the Round Table Hold. Just buy it at the Round Table or use the Samurai class. Terrible drop rate while farming. Up next is the pickaxe that can be farmed in any of the rock people who use it, specifically in the Limgrave tunnels. This behemoth requires 22 strength with a C scaling to start off with, and also 10 dexterity with a D scaling to start off with. I love it for how good it is in PvP. Most of this is going to be a PvP opinion because I use them most of the time. But yeah, the piercing effect it has against shields is very, very helpful, especially with the charged heavy attack. It is another smithing stone and can be infused with other shit. So there you go. And now we come to the namesake of the weapon class itself, the Twin Blade. This requires 10 strength with a starting scaling of D, and then 18 dexterity with a starting scaling of C. It can be found in the southwestern section in the Dragonburnt Ruins inside an enclosed area that you need to access with Torrent. It is a great weapon and wonderful damage. I highly recommend it. So once you get into Agheel Lake here, you're going to keep to the right just so you don't trigger the dragon area boss fight. Jump over here, come down here, and bada bing bada boom, there it is. Your very first Twin Blade, everybody. It's a once again, a very good weapon. I know I kind of breezed through most of this with that, but yeah, it's a wonderful weapon. Please do get it. I highly encourage it. You'll never hear that from me too much. Alright, so after the Twin Blade, we're going to go grab the Reduvia Dagger, which requires 5 strength to use correctly. It gets an E scaling, which is the worst if you remember. 13 dexterity to use correctly, and a C scaling to start off with, as well as 13 arcane, which is the status effect build-up meter. So the more arcane you have, the more status can build up quickly. This gets a B scaling in the arcane. It is a reward for killing the Bloody Finger Nereus outside of Murkwater Cave in Aghiel Lake North. I know it looks like Neri just, but I can't remember where I read it, but it's actually pronounced Nereus. Like you put the U in there for no reason. One of the best daggers in the game, like by far. You can carry this pretty much all the way to the end of the game if you really, really wanted to. So yeah, after getting out of the Limgrave Tunnel, we're going to come over here to the left. I'm going to stop doing that because I'm a fucking child and I have the attention span of one, so... yeah, we're going to come through here, go under this little bridge. We don't need to fight any of these skeletons because they're just there for flavor, I guess. Once we pass them, we're going to keep running until we get to this little rock outcropping here with the 2 trees on it. Once you're here, you're going to want to go ahead and hop off because it's a very, very large invasion radius for the NPC because he'll just show up, and then within 17 seconds you will get a helper who does nothing but also kind of does something. I don't know, it's a fine line for me to draw a bit with. But yeah, there's the Reduvia Dagger. It is, again, one of the best weapons you could ever grab in the game, and I highly recommend you take it. Up next will be the Nagakiba with a 18 strength requirement and an early D scaling, but it also requires 22 dexterity to use correctly with a B scaling. It can be dropped from the Second Church of America on the Altus Plateau upon completion of Bloodyfinger Hunter Yura's questline, or it can be taken from killing Yura after he helps you in the Bloodyfinger Nereus invasion fight to the north of Murkwater Cave. MVP, best katana in the game. Everyone uses it. I swear to God. Like, everyone uses it. This thing is fucking nuts. So as you can see here, the skill I have on it is unsheathed, so I can get the scaling correctly, but it starts off with Piercing Fang when you first get it. Either Ash of War is wonderful, and with that we're going to move on to the next weapon in this area. So coming back over here to Murkwater Cave, which is around here, you're going to be able to get inside and fight Patches. I think it's Unbroken in this game. He has many titles throughout the Soulsborne franchise, but the spear that he uses requires 12 strength to use correctly with an early D scaling, 15 dexterity to use correctly with an early C scaling too, and it's a very good weapon. It's alright. It can be farmed from the Exile Soldiers as well, but you get a +7 variant of it if you kill Patches in Murkwater Cave. There you go. As I'm sure you'll be able to see in a minute, I got sidetracked on the way to get one of the other weapons by getting another weapon. So to circumnavigate that, we're just going to cut through the chase and go for the second one that I thought of immediately upon going to the first one. This is the Great Epee. It requires 15 strength with a D scaling to start off with, and 16 dexterity with a C scaling to start off. It can be found in a chest guarded by 2 Kaiden sellswords near the Aghiel Lake south side of Grace. Sorry. It's great. I love it. It's one of the first heavy thrusting swords you can ever get in the game. I highly recommend doing what I'm doing here and clearing out the camp systematically first. Especially these wizards up top, they will just fucking delete your HP bar if you're not careful. So once you're done with all of this, the chest right behind me is where you can get it, but I just wanted to kill both of them first just to make it easier on myself, and ta-da! There it is. Again, it's one of the greatest, it's one of the best heavy thrusting swords you can get early on. There are better ones, obviously, but, you know, for starting off in the game, this ain't half bad, kid. And now we get to the weapon that I really wanted to get because it was the first one that jumped into my head until I thought of the Great Epee. We are going to get the Bloodhound's Fang, which requires 18 strength to start off with and C scaling, 17 dexterity to use correctly with B scaling, given as a reward for killing the Bloodhound Knight Darrywell, and it's a good weapon, almost too good. It can bring you to hell and back if you want it to. I even use it in the main game to get to the end of the game. I'm sure you could even take it into the DLC. After grabbing that affront to humanity, we'll be going to grab the large club, which requires only 22 strength to use and has a B scaling, so that means it's pretty fucking good. It's the third best kind of scaling you can get. It can be found as ground loot south of the Forlorn Hound Everjail, being guarded by demi-humans. Never really used it besides capturing footage for it, so I don't know if it's any good, but here it is. So now we will make our way into the Stormvale Castle, and we will be starting off with the first weapon, the Weathered Straight Sword, which requires 7 strength to use and D scaling, and then 10 dexterity to use and C scaling. It can be farmed from the commoner enemies that use it in Stormvale Castle. It is a straight sword. After that, we will be grabbing the heavy crossbow. I'm just going to kind of blanket term all of these ones because they're all in the same area, so you can just watch the video to find out where they are. The heavy crossbow requires 14 strength to use and 10 dexterity, doesn't have any scaling because it's a bow, can be farmed from any soldier who uses it. Best part is the lead up to the Castleward Tunnel side of Grace, north of Stormhill Shack side of Grace. It's mid. Up next is the Banished Knight's Halberd, which requires 14 strength and a C scaling, and then 12 dex with another C scaling. Can be farmed from the Banished Knights who wield it specifically in Stormvale Castle. While it may be the same stats as the regular halberd, the scaling is much more better on this variant. Flexibility remains the same as well, however the scaling is what carries this weapon as a solid main arm for most builds. I mean, you've seen me use it fucking a plethora of times in fucking PvP videos. The Warhawk's Talon is next, requiring 10 strength to use with a D scaling, and then 16 dexterity to use with a B scaling. Can be farmed from the Warhawks who have them implanted on their legs in Stormvale. Never used it, scaling is good though. Then the next one is the Brick Hammer with a strength requirement of 31, but it gets an A scaling fresh off the bat. So it can be found as ground loot in the first major area within Stormvale. Love it, amazing for pure strength builds. The Highland Axe is up next with 12 strength to use correctly and C scaling with a 9 dexterity to use and D scaling. Can be found as ground loot in Stormvale Castle in the room with the Grafted Scion. Also a top tier weapon, can stack with any roar buff that you have. The Misery Cord is next with 7 strength required, but an E scaling to use it, or to start off with, and then a 12 dex requirement with a C scaling. Don't let the stats fool you. It can be, it is one of the best critical weapons of all time. So when you stab someone in the back, stance break them and stab them in the chest, or parry them and stab them in the chest, it is gonna hit you with 140 critical damage on top of whatever you have running with your build. So it is a devastatingly powerful weapon. Can be found in ground loot in a lower storage area located near the Grafted Scion in Stormvale. The Pike is up next, requiring 20 strength to use with a C scaling, and then 14 dex with a D scaling. Can be found as ground loot within a massive courtyard full of exile soldiers. Meh. The Torch Pole is up next, requiring 14 strength with a C scaling, and then dex is 15, and I forgot to put down the fucking scaling for it. It's probably also a D. Can be farmed by exile soldiers who wield it, the first being found at Stormvale Castle, Site of Grace, and or within the massive courtyard of exile soldiers from before. The Omen Cleaver is up next with 19 strength required and a C scaling, but also 16 dexterity with a C scaling, kind of like the Dismounter, if you will. Can be farmed off the only Omen who wields it in the beginning area of the game. in again Stormvale, in the massive Exile Soldier Courtyard before reaching the left side Chamber side of Grace. Good scaling for quality builds. The Golem's Halberd is up next, requiring 36 strength and a C scaling in that, and then 14 dexterity with a D scaling. Can be farmed from the 2 iron golems who wield it and can respawn on the Limgrave Divine Bridge. Good for strength builds also. Rounding out the golem armaments is the Golem Greatbow, requiring 24 strength with a C scaling in strength, and then 18 dexterity to use correctly with a D scaling. Can be farmed from the only iron golem using it in Stormvale Castle across the Limgrave Tower Bridge. Highest attack rating or AR if you prefer when it hits at +10. Hard to farm, but totally worth it. Up next is the Crescent Moon Axe from the castle. This requires 25 strength with a D scaling in that, and then 15 dexterity with a C scaling. Drops from the large exile soldiers who wield it, specifically within the gate front area of the Stormvale Castle. Good strength weapon, that's about it. Next is the Hook Claws, which require 8 strength and it has a D scaling, and then 14 dexterity with a B scaling. Found as ground loot in the first major area within Stormvale Castle. Decent gateway weapon to the claw weapon category, highly recommended. Up next is the Axe of Godric, which requires 34 strength to use correctly and gets a D scaling, as well as 22 dexterity and a D scaling. This is another somber smithing weapon, so you need one of each somber smithing stone to upgrade it up to +10. It is dropped as a reward for killing Godric the Grafted and turning his remembrance into the finger reading crone within Roundtable Hold. Used it once, I was unimpressed. And then finally, rounding out the weapons in the Stormvale Castle is the Grafted Dragon, which requires 20 strength, gets a C scaling, 14 dexterity to use correctly, gets a D scaling, and then 12 faith to use correctly, which gives you a D scaling. Dropped as a reward for killing Godric the Grafted and turning in his remembrance into the finger reader crone within Roundtable Hold. The above. Used it once, I was unimpressed. Since this isn't in any particular order, we're going to go with the Hand Axe next. It requires 9 strength to use correctly with a D scaling and 8 dexterity to use correctly with a C scaling. Can be bought from the Nomadic Merchant in East Limgrave within the Mistwoods and a little northwest of Fort Height. Really good, really powerful, oddly enough. One of the weapons where the scaling hardly means anything, but in a positive way. Y'all have seen me use it in the PvP videos I post. I'll be posting a link in the description to a video that explains why it's so good, better than I can later on. Same with the Shamshir weapon. So, see you guys on that one. Last in our hand axe category is the Forked Hatchet, which requires 9 strength to use correctly with D scaling and 14 dexterity to use with B scaling. Fanged Imps drop this in the Stormfoot Catacombs or the French Folk Hero's Grave. It could be used as a good bleed weapon, that's about it. Up next is a PvP crowd favorite, the Shamshir, which can be found at the High Road and Catacombs. So follow this path over the Saints Bridge and you'll get there pretty early on, pretty easily. You don't really need to run past anything once you get into the High Road cave here. It's a cave, not catacombs, sorry. You'll be besieged on all sides by idiots. Do follow my path though. It's, I hope, easy enough for everyone to understand. Plus it like minimizes the amount of surprise enemies you'll have with you waiting for you. Ambushing you. So once you head deeper into the cave, you're going to find all these wolves, which is pretty much all there is for this section. And then you get to here, which is where all the bats are. Because why not? I don't know. Anyway, the Shamshir needs 7 strength to use correctly, and then 13 dexterity. Before I continue, please do not jump off of this waterfall cliff. You will have a bad time. Instead, do what I just did there. Anyway, the Shamshir gets a descaling in both when it starts out, and it can be grabbed as groundlet in the center of the High Road Cave in northern Limgrave. And believe me when I say this is a monster in PvP. I'll post another link in the description to explain why with a video much better than I can. So there you go. So, rounding out this list, we have the Regalia of Eokide. It requires 12 strength to use correctly with a D scaling, 18 dexterity with a C scaling, and then 15 arcane with a C scaling, once again. Can be found early on as grand loot on a cliff southwest-ish of the Third Church of America. It's just a watered-down version of the Marae Executioner's Greatsword, but this is a dexed version to the strength version of the aforementioned Marae sword. It's fun to use, kinda, but the most mileage you'll get out of either of these swords is the Marae Executioner. It's A, bigger, and B, actually gets up in the fucking morning wanting to be a legendary armament, unlike its younger little brother here. So you'll want to follow my little pathway here as closely as possible, but don't do what I do and forget how to do this, because it's been several years since I've gone for the Regalia of Eokide. That's just me. So you're going to want to jump up onto this cliff. I promise you this is where it is. Then jump over here, jump up here, jump up to this little cliff here, and ta-da, you're here. Technically it's in Caelid because the start of this cave begins in Caelid, but you can jump up to the backside with ease. So, yep, there you go. I had initially glossed over this one because I forgot that it existed first and foremost, but the Spiked Club is another weapon that you can get early on in the game with a 12 strength requirement and a C scaling in it, and then a 7 dex requirement with C scaling. Apparently it can be dropped from the large demi-humans who use it specifically within the beginning area of the coastal cave. Not worth the effort to farm. God almighty fix the farming from software. Jesus Christ. Coming back to the Gatefront Runes site of Grace, we will be going after the Falchion, which can be farmed by demi-humans wielding it predominantly under Kenneth Height. It's a weapon that I don't use, so I have no opinion on it whatsoever. It requires 9 strength to use correctly with a C scaling, and then 13 dexterity to use with a C scaling as well. It is a weapon. And finally, after all these years, is the Halberd, which requires 14 strength to use correctly with a C scaling to start off with, and then 12 dexterity with a D scaling to begin with. It can be bought from the nomadic merchant in northern Limgrave on the further side of the Saints Bridge when heading away from the death-touched catacombs. I mean, it's alright. Again, my opinion hasn't changed on it because that Banished Knight Halberd is just infinitely better than that. But yeah. Holy shit, guys. It took me about 3-ish years to finish this fucking video. I hope you guys enjoy it. If I left anything out, please do bring it up to me in the comments, politely, obviously. You can also get the short sword here. I forgot to add that in, so I'll probably... I don't really feel like doing it. You guys saw it on the screen. You can pause it if you want. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.